My name is Firuz Sagri, and today I'd like to talk about the best practices in the crisis management and the crisis communication industry. Now, crises have been around for as long as humans have walked on this earth, but being able to manage them and communicate about them, that's something that's only come around in the last 30 or so years as its own field. Now, why is crisis management and crisis communication so important? Well, to think about that, you have to think about what the average person thinks about when they hear about a crisis. Do they immediately assume that a company is going through something good? Of course not. A crisis is something that has the potential to severely damage a company's reputation and all the goodwill it's held up, as well as employees, people involved, and other stakeholders. And it can really turn out to be a negative situation for that company if handled improperly. Crisis communication, on the other hand, is a subset of crisis management that involves the collection and dissemination of information about the crisis that can help the company during the process. So some of the critical issues that, if executed wrong, can result in the downfall of a company include early detection, selecting the correct response, having a dedicated crisis-specific communication system and a crisis team at your beck and call, rapid release of a statement during and immediately following a crisis, as well as an impactful follow-up action that reassures your stakeholders that you do in fact care and the statement wasn't just hot air. Maintenance of prior reputation, and this is one of the most important ones, because if you have a prior reputation, all of that can disappear in the blink of an eye, especially with modern technology and communication systems as the way they are. And finally, review and analysis, so what you take away from the crisis after it has happened and what you do in the future. All right, so now that I've discussed the critical issues with crisis management and communication, I'd like to highlight two particular examples that exemplify best practices in the industries. The first one I'd like to talk about is Tylenol in 1982. And this particular case highlights constant communication, rapid action, and incorporated lessons learned after the crisis. So in 1982, Tylenol discovered that 7 people were killed by poisoned bottles of Tylenol that had been tampered with. And the company immediately responded to the allegations that the bottles were poisoned in the factory by proving that it was impossible for that to happen. Second, even though they had done that, they knew it wasn't enough, so they recalled every single one of the 30 million bottles of Tylenol on sale, proving to their customers and stakeholders that they were serious about this, recovering from the action. And finally, they incorporated the lesson learned about the bottles of Tylenol and people's response to them by introducing a new tamper-proof bottle soon after that is still used on shelves, and a new type of pill that made it clear whether it had been tampered with or not. And those three are some of the most important practices as far as best practices in the industry go. The second example that I'd like to bring up is less of the Mitroff model and more of the situational crisis communication theory model, but it's still just as relevant to best practices. So in 2009, during the economic crisis and the big 3 automobile crisis in America, General Motors was not in the best of shape. It had accepted a ton of government bailout money, and in the process accepted new leadership, partially appointed by the government, and it knew it had to justify the amount of money and restore its reputation as a powerful and dependable American manufacturer of cars. So it used SCCT to come up with a communication strategy during that crisis to make itself seem as though the company had changed, but was also at the same time still the same company. So it used the justify strategy after establishing the type of crisis. It established the type of crisis, and then from that picked the appropriate response. And based on that, the company managed to recover fairly quickly. Only a year after that, people were reporting high satisfaction with General Motors products and high faith in the brand's ability. And as a result of that, I consider it to be one of the best practices in crisis communication and crisis management. So in conclusion, crisis management and crisis communication, while they're relatively young fields, are especially important in today's world, especially considering that communication has become so much faster in the time when it was established to now. Bad information can spread so quickly that a company may not be aware of it. And for that matter, it's really important to use both of the best practices that I've highlighted here during crisis communication and crisis management.